Hola, ¿cómo están todos ustedes? Un gusto de volver a encontrarnos. Hoy un día muy especial, ya que vamos a poder conversar con John Guiver. John es el escritor de Arriba en la Cordillera, To Play the Game in English, Arriba en la Cordillera, la historia completa de la odisea de los Andes, de la tragedia de los Andes, que es el libro que estamos distribuyendo en toda Latinoamérica junto con John. Yo lo ayudé en la investigación, soy el traductor, editor en cierta medida en español y publisher en toda Latinoamérica. Recuerden que el libro lo pueden encontrar en toda Latinoamérica en Busca Libre, que es una plataforma de venta de libros que tiene presencia en Latinoamérica, España y en Estados Unidos, en el mercado americano, también lo pueden encontrar. Hello, John. How are you today?
Hi, Guillermo. Very well, thanks. How are you?
Very good. It's incredible all the noise that and the buzz that the movie have made, and this trending scenario is incredible to our book because people are getting hooked about the history and they found a lot of info in our book. Can we please discuss a little bit your impressions about the movie?
Well, I think it's a brilliant movie. It's a work of art. It's an extraordinary production, I think. I've seen it 4 times. It does have the same overall goals as my book, which was really to balance the story. So I started researching my book many years ago. I started writing it in 2019, which was a bit before Bayona started doing the movie. Although also I think it had been in his mind for a long time. But what I wanted to do in the book was to balance the story in the sense of talk about, those who hadn't been talked about up to this point, the ones who didn't come back, their families, the impact of the tragedy in the community, because the survivors have been elevated to great heights and very popular, and naturally so. It's an extraordinary odyssey, but they've been interviewed many times. They've been appeared in documentaries and so on. So I wanted to balance that, both in terms of the people, but also in terms of describing a little bit about the environment they came from, which is quite a special environment.
It's the scenario of Carrasco.
Yes, the neighborhood of Carrasco, which was a very idyllic place. The passengers all knew each other. So, for example, in the early 60s, 26 out of the 40 passengers were all in the same small school, Stella Maris, or the Christian as it's known. So it was a very close-knit community, and this tragedy had a huge impact because some people won and some people lost. Some people came back from the mountain, some people stayed. And so I wanted to balance it in that way. Now, the movie, which you asked, it was your first question, I think had very similar goals. We see really Numa representing not just the people who didn't come back, but all the survivors, all the passengers. And I think, for me, some of the critical scenes are those dreamlike scenes in the hospital at San Fernando, the shower scene, the scene where the father is cutting the fingernails, and the scene where a journalist is putting a microphone in front of one of the survivors, and he says, "What are they looking for? In my friends, we were all dead. So we were all equal. We were all the same. We were all dead, but now they've come back." And so by focusing in on that point, that's the point of bifurcation, the point of separation between the survivors and those who stayed on the mountain. By going back to that point, he reunifies the survivors with the passengers, those who died. And so I think it's an extraordinary movie. And for anyone who hasn't seen it, I very much, recommend it and to see it on the big screen.
Yes, in the cinema, it's incredible, the sound effects and how the sound of is another star of the movie.
Yeah.
Le quiero contar a la gente sobre tu persona, de lo que tú haces. John es un matemático, doctor en tecnología aplicada, en inteligencia artificial. John trabajó muchos años en Microsoft, se jubiló de Microsoft y al retirarse decide comenzar a investigar la historia de los Andes. Ahora quiero que nos cuente cómo fue todo ese proceso. John, I was telling the audience that you are a mathematic, you work all your professional career in artificial intelligence and technology development. You was working on Microsoft when you get retired, and then you start researching about the Andes ordeal. Can you tell us a little bit how was your professional work, how you start your process of researching the Andes case, your first encounters with the story, and then we'll start more Q&As.
Right, so I read the book Alive even in, I think it must have been the 80s. I knew about the story, but I hadn't read the book, and my mother-in-law gave me the book, and I was captivated. I read it many, many times. And right from the beginning, I was always really interested in, these names we hear that are just mentioned once in Vivan. So Maquin, Martinez Lamas, Vasquez, and so on. But there was very little information. Of course, the story really wasn't talked about other than, the books that had come out, which were about the survivors. So, as you say, I had a career in artificial intelligence, in technology development, in technology software, very privileged career. I was in research and development, did some amazing stuff, had some amazing colleagues. And that, took up the bulk of my life. But in 2013, I went on the expedition of Ricardo Peña, who goes with Eduardo Strach to the scene of the crash. And I met Eduardo in 2013. I went back again in 2015, and Eduardo had put me in touch with Pedro. And I met Pedro in Buenos Aires. And his book had just come out in Argentina. And I told him, I'm going to translate your book, even though I didn't speak a word of Spanish.
That's very important because John conoció a Pedro Algorta. Pedro recién estaba lanzando su libro y John tomó una decisión media. I think it's a very Latin American decision, the one you take. Tomó una decisión muy alocada de traducir el libro de Pedro sin saber español. Can you please talk about that word that you get involved about translate Pedro's book with?
Well, so I didn't know if I could do it, but I decided, well, I'll translate, chapter 1 and the preface, and see how it goes. And it was incredibly difficult because, I had to learn, obviously, enough Spanish that I could start to understand. And it was a very, doing that one chapter took me a long, long time. But I did it. And of course, translating into one's own language, translating into English is much easier than me translating to Spanish, which for me would be impossible. But because I can write good English, I was able to write a very nice chapter. And I emailed it to Pedro. And he emailed back within, I don't know, 20 minutes, half an hour. And he said, John, this is incredible. How did you do this? I'm in Scotland right now giving a seminar. And I've just found an English publisher for my book and I need a translation. So everything sort of fell in place just miraculously. And I told him, I knew Pedro's a businessman. So yes. I told Pedro, look, I'll have chapter 2 by this date, chapter 3 by this date, chapter 4 by that date, and so on. So he knew exactly when he'd get it. And then once that dialogue had started, if there was a difficult bit, I'd go to him and say, look, I don't really understand, you know, this Spanish, this idiom, this expression.
Pedro had a very good English. He studied in Stanford, and you can have a more fluent.
Yes. Yeah, and so he does speak good English, and so we were able to talk, you know, to talk about it if I had difficulties and so on. So I finished his book. He came over to my house in England. We went through the whole thing over a couple of days, and then it got published. And he was very generous. He said in his acknowledgements, John's given me a book, you know, better in English than in my native language.
Did Pedro introduce you to Pierce Paul Reed?
No, when I was translating Pedro's book, I contacted Piers Paul Reed through his website, I think. And eventually, and he responded to me, and I had a telephone conversation with him. I told him what I was doing. We had a good rapport. We'd actually been to the same Catholic rugby playing school, but we were sort of 15 years apart, so I never knew him.
Yes.
But it was a sort of a connection point. And he, you know, he told me a lot. He told me about his archive and so on. And when Pedro came over, I went down with Pedro to London, and we met up with Piers and had lunch together. And, you know, it's very, very pleasant. And then what happened was Pedro, you know, Pedro and Coche have cousins in,
yes,
you know,
are kind of related.
Cousins of cousins.
Cousins of cousins.
Yeah, and Pedro spoke to Coche, and Coche just bought his book out, and I don't know what the conversation was, but I imagine it was something like, there's this crazy Englishman who'll translate your book for free. Why don't you get in touch with him? So Coche got in touch, and I said, yeah, I'll do it, but, you know, let me just finish the summer, enjoy the summer, and then over the winter, I'll translate your book. And so I did that. And so through those contacts and some others, through the museum in, you know, the Museo Andes, 1972, with Jorg, and Jorg introduced me to some of the sisters of those who died, and, you know, Graciela and Raquelina Nikolic and so on. And I met Canessa because he came to England, and I contacted him and said, look, you know, I did Pedro's book and Coche's book. Let's get together in London.
I think that to say to the audience, this was like 80 years ago. It's not the big buzz that Andes Ordeal have today. So for them, I think was very impressive that this British guy want to get deep on the stories and make something. Can you please talk us about your first trips to Montevideo, your first approach to the families, and how this thirsty of knowledge of you ends in the final project of the book?
Well, so there were sort of two different threads. One was based in Montevideo and all the people I met there. The other was with Piers Paul Reed. So if I just do the Montevideo thing first. So I think the first time I went to Montevideo was probably around 2015, I think. And I'd just been on the trip with Eduardo. Eduardo was very kind. He showed me around the city, some of the places, some of the resorts, you know, Punta del Este and north of there. He introduced me to Fito and Daniel Fernandez, his cousins. But my contact with the families came through different routes. So, for example, Sandra McKeedian, who's Philip's sister, Pedro put me in touch with her, and I had a long email conversation.
Pedro and Philip was very close friends, classmates in the School of Economics. Para poner el contexto, Felipe era el amigo de Pedro Algorta, los dos estudiaban economía en la universidad y eran quizás los más, siendo parte del colegio, eran mayores que el resto, un poco mayor que el resto. They were kind of older than the others, and they are not rugby players since they were alumni of the Stella Maris.
Yes, they weren't rugby players. They were quite intellectual people, and they studied together along with Arturo Nogueira. So I had long conversations with Sandra through Alfonso Guerino, who's Carlos Valeta's nephew. I met the Valeta sisters. Through Jorg, I met Graciela, Raquelina, and several other people, Ana Inés Martinez Lamas, and so on.
The people in Montevideo, you start with the Maquirians, and then the voice, you get viral.
It sort of became viral. So, you know, Teresita Vasquez was another person who I met through Canessa, who was working with Teresita's son.
And then it's like a snowball.
Yeah. So when I decided I was going to write the book, so I'd done many years of research before this point, but 2019 I had a sabbatical from my work at Microsoft. So I had 6 weeks in Montevideo. I didn't have anything planned. I just went over. I had various contacts. I went to people. I said, I'm writing a book. I'm thinking of writing a book. And I started interviewing people. And I said, what I said was, look, I really want to balance the story. The survivors have been elevated up to here. Very little is known about your brothers. I want to elevate them as well. I want to tell their story for history. And I started interviewing, and as you say, it went a little bit viral. So beginning, I just had 1 interview a day, and then it went up to 2 a day. And towards the end, I was having 3 or 4 interviews a day. So never booked more than a day or 2 in advance.
Do you think that your background as an outsider, a foreign, and your background as a scientific, it helps you in the decision to gain the trust?
Well, I think there was several things that helped gain trust. So one is I knew a lot about the story.
Yes.
And so I wasn't just a journalist or someone coming in trying to just
fly to Montevideo with a solid background of knowledge.
I knew, you know, perhaps more than, well, I certainly knew more than most people, possibly than anyone.
Totally. You are the world expert. John es realmente, con Pierce Paul Reed, los expertos mundiales del caso. Esto lo digo a título personal. This is my opinion. Quizás sabe más que muchos de los sobrevivientes. Maybe you know more than a lot of survivors.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's possible. Obviously, I mean, it's a brave thing to say that, because, you know, I wasn't on the mountain, but I've listened to many interviews from the time and from later years.
Archive.
Yeah. So so that was number one, is that I had this huge fountain of knowledge. So I knew everything, you know, so it provided the context for my interviews. So there was never sort of me fishing around for something to say. I had very
trying to get info on the same interviews that a lot of researchers do that. Yeah, I'm gonna go to this source. No, you get to the source to make questions.
Yes,
specifics.
Right. I think the second thing, I think you're right, is that I was, you know, I'm a low key. I'm not a, you know, I'm not a loud, brash sort of reporter type. I'm a low key Englishman, and I think, you know, that put people at ease. The third thing was, I said, look, this book that I'm going to write, I'm going to keep complete editorial control. No one's going to, you know, try and impose some sensationalism or
editorial white sharks.
Yeah, or something, you know, disrespectful or anything like that. I'm going to have complete control of this. I'm not going to go through a mainline publisher.
Wasn't the idea of making money, getting famous, anything. It was to rigorous research about these topics that the others research doesn't touch it.
Right. So I think those were the three key things. Now, what happened was I got 65 hours of interviews, and I started. I was still working at Microsoft in 2019, 2020, although I'd gone down to 3 days a week. But I started writing all these stories. And I was very adamant that when I'd write these stories, I would send them to the family so they could see what I've written to say, well, no, you got this wrong, or, you know, this is something I really don't want to, you know, be revealed or
probably some specifics changes, but the main opinion was amazing job.
But the effect was that actually they engaged with me even more. So then I had many WhatsApp, you know, conversations. I had many email conversations. And so I actually ended up writing the chapters, expanding the chapters quite significantly. When they saw it was a reality, then they were more willing to engage, you know, with the project.
I never make this question for you, but you start the project itself, you write the biographies first, and then you came back to the research, or you start a very marked pipeline forecast. No, I'm gonna start with a review of the passengers, then, or you make first. How was the steps?
Well, I had several sort of balls in the air at the same time. So I wanted to write a history of Uruguay that was very connected to the passengers, because I thought that was very important. And you know, history, Uruguay is a young country. You can almost reach out and touch the history. You know, the grandfather of Eduardo and Fito.
Yes, died in the Revolution.
He was in the Civil War, and, you know, in a doctor in the Civil War. So, so the history is very close. The politics was very interesting. So I really wanted to understand that. So I did a lot of reading and a lot of connecting up with Carrasco, with the survivors, with the Tupamaros, and so on. So that was one
like a recount of the historic foundings of Uruguay, and then you make an amazing recall of this 20th century of Uruguay, the founding of Carrasco, the school, and then we start the narrative with the survivors.
Yeah, right. So for me, the least risky part was the stuff about the trip and the mountain, because I had a lot of very rich information on that. That was the least risky part.
Because we get all the background of Pierce Paul Reed archive.
Right, he gave me special access to his archive that's not available to to the public. So my worry was that some of the artifacts, in particular the tapes, would not be
Just in a correct way.
Well, no, they have a 50-year life, basically. So I wanted to get them digitized. So I paid for them.
The magnetic tape lists 50 years?
50 years, yeah. So I was worried that, that all that would be lost.
New data. Thank you.
And so I asked the library and I asked Piers Paul Reed, look, I really think this should be digitized. It's an incredible record. I mean, it's completely private. No one can see it. But because I was part of that, that digitization process, I was able to, to review those interviews. So I had a lot of information.
Give me a second to put in context to the audience. Básicamente en el archivo de Piers Paul Reed están los relatos frescos de los sobrevivientes, que es podríamos decir, la verdad más rigurosa que existe sobre lo que pasó en la montaña. Y además están todos los archivos que los investigadores asociados que trabajaron con Piers le entregaron, que eran los antecedentes familiares de los sobrevivientes, así, y un montón de información que permiten a un investigador de la talla de John poder, con esos archivos, hacerse un escenario global de todo lo que sucedió, de lo que sucedió antes, durante y después del accidente. I was telling the people that when the Piers Paul Reed archive, it's composed by the interviews of the survivors, but also with all the research that the associated investigators give to Piers, and all that materials can give you a totally complete view of the before, during the accident, and before after the accident.
And then there are many other things in the archive. For example, there's all the correspondence with the publishers, the whole publishing process, which was very, very interesting. That's another part of the book.
Legal contract, the scripts of the movies. It's an amazing archive. Very sensitive in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways it's like an X-ray of one of the most important books of the 20th century. It's one of the most selling books of all time.
Right. So to get back to your original question, so I'd done a lot of research. I knew about what was happening on the mountain. I knew what had happened in Mendoza because I'd done a lot of research and digging around on that.
Yes. Like a minute by minute thing of Mendoza.
Right. So I was pretty confident I could write those without much problems. So I concentrated initially on the history and on the stories about those who didn't come back. And there was one other big gap, right? And that was what happened in Chile. And yes. I'd sort of put that to one side to be dealt with later. And actually, I tried to contact you quite early on, I think. Yes. And somehow
when I was trying to contact you, I realized I had a message in Facebook that you was trying to contact me a year ago.
Yeah.
Yo cuando supe de la existencia de John, corría a Facebook a tratar de contactarlo, y ahí me di cuenta de que John ya me había enviado un mensaje un año atrás y que yo no había visto, y ahí nos pusimos en contacto. Y can you continue the story?
Right. So just to finish on those stories I did, I didn't have all of them, but I had many of them, maybe 3/4 of them, and I'd sent them to be reviewed, and I got lots of great feedback. And I went to Montevideo again, and I met with, the families again, and we went over them, and so I was very sure that that part of the book was now quite solid. And actually I'd finished those reasonably early, probably around the middle of 2000. Well, we met in 2022, didn't we? So it was around sometime in that year.
I traveled to England on April of 22.
Yeah. And going back to Montevideo again, I got more contacts and I was able to complete many other of the stories. In particular, Diego Storm's story. I was able to create a very, it turned out to be one of the richest stories there. I spoke with his brother and with his cousin, Margarita Montes. So the history part of it, I had many contacts in Montevideo. I had people I could show the history to, and so I ran it by a few people, and they provided some feedback on that as well.
Your Museo Andes was a very important, trustful source to you.
Yeah, Jorg, Connie Hughes, who was, part of the committee.
Connie Hughes era un compañero de clase de varios de los sobrevivientes, él es un periodista muy destacado en Uruguay y él fue miembro del comité organizador de la conferencia de prensa.
Yeah, very, very important person in Uruguay. And then I can tell the story about how we met. So you contacted me. I think, well, do you want to tell a bit about the story? I think you contacted Ángeles, right?
Yes. Yo contacté a Ángeles Mardones, que Ángeles Mardones era la novia de Guido Magri, que ella tiene una historia muy sensible relacionada a la historia, no solo con Guido, sino otros detalles que pueden encontrar en el libro. Y cuando yo contacté a Ángeles, ella me dice, ¿sabes qué, Guillermo? Para mí este tema es bastante sensible, bastante complicado, y yo ya hablé con el gringo, con el investigador inglés, y no pienso volver a hablar con nadie más sobre el tema. Así que te agradezco mucho tu gentileza de acercarte a mí, pero yo no te voy a entregar mi testimonio. Y ahí yo un poco me obsesioné con poder encontrar al señor Guiver, para poder ver qué tipo de investigación estaba realizando y si se parecía a la mía. I was telling the people that I met Ángeles Mardones. I speak to her. She told me that for her it's difficult to talk about the accident, that she shares his memoirs with you, his memories with you, and she doesn't want to speak again with nobody. And then I was trying to reach you because I really want to know I really want to know the spine of your research and see how familiar or close was to my research.
Yeah. So you contacted me and you said you were going to come over. You wanted to meet Piers Reed.
Yes. Yo quería conocer a Piers Reed porque a mí me parecía fantástica la historia de Piers, de cómo en 6 meses él crea un libro que en los próximos 6 meses vendió millones de copias. I was telling the people that I really want to interview Piers because I was intrigued in how he built a life in 6 months, and in the next 6 months, the book sells millions of copies.
Yeah. So, and it's an incredible story, and it's told in Arriba in the Cordillera.
Yes.
And you came over, and we met up. We met for the first time actually at Piers Paul Reed's house.
Yes, in Piers Reed's house.
We'd had some video
call I have with Piers, with you as a special guest, and was incredible because my plan was to interview Piers a couple of hours then, but Piers was incredible, warm with us. He made a nice lunch. We speak about a lot of things. We have a very nice chat. He give me the access to the archive, and we can meet up and we can guess that you were a very professional and with a lot of knowledge, and I think the same way with me.
Right.
I don't know.
No, yeah. I mean, I think it was a great meeting, and then we went to. So you saw the public parts of the archive, and
yes,
up in
public.
In the Brotherton Library.
It still needs peers' approval to go to the.
You need peers' approval. You need peers' approval. You need the library's approval. You have to sign all sorts of non-disclosure.
That's
agreements.
If I was trying to do that from Chile, probably it's gonna say me no. The only thing that I have the approval of peers, and you help me with all the tedious bureaucracy of get access to those files.
Yeah, I mean, you have to go through certain bureaucratic impedance, yeah. So you spent a couple of days. We chatted a lot, and if you remember that first night, we sat down in a restaurant and had a big chat about my book and what you had been doing, all your interviews and so on. And I was going to show you what I'd written so far.
We signed an NDA in a napkin.
And I just dug it out. We have it. Well, it's just a note of paper. I have it here.
Yes.
And you see
my signature there.
Yeah, 5th of April 2022. So we basically said, look, we're both researching the story. We're both potentially writing books.
And we're going to steal nothing for you. I think for you it was more difficult, the decision to trust in the unknown Latin American.
And then I showed you my book, which was about, I think, 2/3 done at the time. I'd done quite a lot of stuff, and then you came down to my house, and I let you read through the stuff I'd written about the writing of Alive, which is something you were very interested in.
Yes. And that night, the night that you showed me your research was one of my most depressive nights ever, and was a big bang, because I found a solution for that, because I'm gonna speak. John me mostró su investigación en el hotel donde estábamos. Yo fui a su habitación, me mostró su trabajo, y fue una noche de las más deprimentes de mi vida, porque ahí yo me di cuenta del calibre y del tamaño y de la robustez de la investigación de John, y me di cuenta de que lo mío estaba bastante disminuido. Para mí había sido un esfuerzo grande dedicarle mi tiempo libre a este libro, un esfuerzo económico también importante, viajar a Londres, y ahí me fui a llorar después a mi pieza, llamé a mi mujer y dije, oye, vine a perder el tiempo. I was telling the people that you showed me your research was one of the most depressing nights ever, because I see the robust and the volume of your research. Mine was not that my research was bad or nothing. That was yours were biggest and have a lot of more perspective than mine. My investigation was a lot of facts that happens in Chile. That you have a more narrative, a way more work. You have I don't know, the half of the book ready, and then I realized that we have to work together, and then you can follow up with the story.
Well, first of all, I want to say your interviews, your research was incredible, Guillermo. I mean, yes, it was limited to Chile, but it was an extraordinary bit of work. Now we sort of discussed at some point in the following months whether we should collaborate on a book, because you've been planning to write a book.
Yes.
And I asked around the families a bit, and I realized that I really couldn't do that because of the promise I'd made, which was that I would have complete editorial control. And as soon as there's a second author, then you sort of lose that. And so then you were very generous then. You made a proposal, which was an incredible proposal. You said, I'll tell you what, John, I'll give you access to all my research in Chile, but you give me translation rights, you give me the rights to publish to the Spanish-speaking world. And for me, this was three birds killed with one stone. It was incredible, because I had now the sort of the source material to write about the rescue and the whole Chilean side of the story, and very unseen material. I mean, it was very new material. These were many people who had never been interviewed in depth before. So you provided me with that. I also then had a translator and a publisher in Chile, which was two other things. And you'd also contacted Cent Photo and various photo archives. You'd contacted the Chilean Air Force, the FACH, to get all the documents, and you provided all that for me for the book. And then
I realized that your book, if I can help you, the final product is gonna be the conclusion research about the ordeal, and the magnificence of the story. You have to take rough decisions, and one of difficult decisions was to put my ego aside and said, hey, I have to help in this project, and finally became my project, because we was like 1 year working on the translation and some parts of the interview, the photos, the caption of the photos, the see how to print it, because I'm a journalist, but I quit journalism a lot of years ago. I have another work, so I have to get involved in the printing business, and to print was another difficult step. So it will take us a year to finally see this product material.
Yeah, I mean, the translation process itself was a very taxing thing for you, I think. I mean, because you did one chapter at a time.
Yes.
Then we translated it back into English to compare with the original. Then for the some parts of the story, the ones about the those who didn't come back, we sent the Spanish versions to the families so that they could look at those. And
it's like the same way you work with the English version, in the point that the families of the ones who didn't come back was also involved in the Spanish translation. So hey, see this, give us your approval, change this, and things like that. So was a very slow but consistently work.
And we had I mean, we worked solidly through that year, didn't we? We had a meeting every week where we went over one chapter at a time, because it's a long book, 571 pages.
Yes,
200,000 plus words.
If I really know the efforts, I think I will not get involved on this. I think that the ignorance about translation, the ignorance about the printing business was a key factor, because if Guillermo 2024 right now, the Guillermo 22 said, I stay in your home, stay in home, don't fly to England.
Well, the ignorance, so it's like in the mountain, right? The ignorance of how far they'd have to walk, it was what allowed them to do it. And I knew, of course, that translating it was going to be really, really difficult, because I translated 2 books.
And you told me that in the first translate we made was Julio Martinez Lamas, and I see the number of pages. I said, it's 10 pages. I don't know. It's 12 pages. It's a piece of cake. And I realized that was like a day in the first paragraph, trying to get the same vibe of you was, oh, this is gonna be huge work.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was.
But you did it, and then you did a brilliant job with setting up the publishing and the printing, and now hopefully your listeners can reap the benefits of of your translation.
John, what was your, when you finally you finished the book? Then it was like a year of like a pause on your path of this story, and now there is a new interest about the story, and you start to become the most trustful source in the world. How was this new scenario for you? Yesterday, sorry if I say to the viewers, you was recording a very important podcast all around the world. How this new scenario is for you?
Well, there is a lot of interest right now, and one of the things that happened in the UK was a documentary, and it was a 3-part documentary, and basically it's
episode.
1 hour, 3 hours.
Wow, that's big. Yesterday, I interviewed Fito, and Fito told me, I speak to the British guys. Very interesting. He hasn't seen it, but he told me that he feels that the work was very professional.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically interviews with, you've got Nando Coche, Eduardo, Fito, Roy, and then some of the families. You've got Daniel.
Amount of survivors.
Yeah, Arturo's brother Daniel, Fernando Vasquez, sister Teresita. There's Ana Inés Martinez Lamas. There's Raquelina Nikolic. There's Soledad, Coche's wife, and these are
the whole scenario. Man.
So these interviews they're very simple. The survivors are just talking, and the families they're just talking to the camera, and there's some rough reconstructions. This is a very reputable organization, ITN, but they don't have huge.
Al explicar a la gente, ITN es como uno de los canales de televisión más importantes de Inglaterra, como la BBC, de ese nivel.
And they don't have huge amounts of money, like Bayona, of course, or
yes.
So
production.
The reconstructions are okay, but it's mainly just people talking. And when I put I put the ITN team in touch with everyone. I think Nando they'd already contacted, but I put them in touch. I said, you got to speak to Fito, you got to speak to Roy and so on, Coche. You got to speak to Daniel Nogueira and Teresita Vasquez and so on. And I said, look, you have 3 hours. You have to tell a broader story than the typical story that's told in a documentary. And the producer guy is a guy called Ollie Price. He was very receptive to this, and he stuck to his word. He had really told the whole story, both in terms of what happened on the mountain, the rescue, but also what happened in Montevideo. And so, in some sense, these 3 things, the film, Bayona's film, my book, and this documentary, are trying to tell a wider story. And I think that's the big change at this point in time.
The new scenario, that maybe the focus on this new focus on the deal is in the ones who didn't come back versus these superhero figures that the other movie creates in turn of Parrado and Roberto.
Yeah. So that documentary got a lot of
Buzz.
Buzz in the UK. I mean, it was on for 3 successive nights, and people can watch it on catch up. So I had various radio interviews. I have this very important podcast.
Domino media effect.
Yeah. So it's good. I mean,
it's amazing for us.
Yeah.
Do you like this role of world experts? I know it's a very important thing to know, to be the most important person outside the survivors. And this is, I think, it's not my opinion. If you want to know about the Andes case, there is the 14 alive survivors, Piers Paul Reed, who doesn't speak with anybody, and you now are following the story and the work of your research put things in a new perspective, in a very same way that the movie. And that thing doesn't prepare.
Yeah, I mean, the movie of my book obviously is. I mean, I've tried to write it in a a nice manner. I mean, yes. It's a history. There's a lot of information in the book. There's a lot of, I've cross-checked lots and lots of things. I've been to many different sources. So it's I mean, I'm sure there are things that are that are wrong, but for the large part, I think it's it's a definitive history of the event. Of course, the movie is a very different thing, right? In a movie, you have to make certain changes. Two conversations get merged. An expedition gets merged.
I think it's an editorial decision. One of them is, for example, the rescue is one day. Mendoza doesn't reflects on the movie, so it's like the same decision.
Yeah, and it's this is natural. There's nothing wrong with that. The movie was much bigger than the having every fact in order, but there's incredible authenticity in the movie. So I knew this, Guillermo. The very first scene we see when right at the beginning, we see Numa go back to his house, and it's actually his house.
Yes.
And I bet I was the only person who knew that outside the production team and Numa's family, because in research for my book, I found out where all the passengers lived.
You made this amazing map of the neighborhood where all lives. I know you get really obsessed with the Puyol Street and exactly houses.
So I found the exact houses of all the passengers.
Nogueiras, Ponce de León, Nicola's houses, all of them. You make me an incredible surrounding trip in Carrasco.
But Numa lived the furthest away from anyone of all the passengers. He was like, I mean, if you take a bus, it's sort of 2 bus rides away to some remote part of town north of downtown. And so I don't think anyone, probably not even the survivors, will have gone there in previous years. I mean, I don't know if Pancho had gone there, maybe. But
probably Pancho.
So when I saw that, I thought, wait a minute, that's Numa's house.
Yes. I can't believe. I don't know if you saw. I posted on Instagram a coche where the ambulance driver with a mustache, like a beefy guy like me. There is only one photo of that guy, and then in the movie you see the guy driving the ambulance is exactly the same. And who's gonna know that? Because I sent them to the movie producers that photo. 2 persons in the world know about that guy.
Yeah.
This
details
person have to copycat the same person. It's incredible.
Yeah. So that authenticity is just incredible right throughout the mountain. I mean, the scenes in the mountain, you know,
You've been in the valley.
The valley, yes, of course. Incredible. The scenes in the hospital, just there's such authenticity there that you know, of course, in the movie you have to make decisions to, you know, to merge things, as you say.
I don't want to be indiscreet, but when you met Bayona, he signed your book and make a very funny, I don't know, the sign.
Let's see if I can find that. He signed my Sociedad de la Nieve.
Yes.
And he said to John, I'm a great admirer of this story, but you are even more so than me.
But Bayona le firmó un ejemplar de la Sociedad de la Nieve y le puso en la dedicatoria, yo creo que sabía mucho de la historia, pero tú sabes mucho más que yo. It's an incredible quote.
Yeah. Oh, it's nice. He's a great guy, and I've seen him a couple of times now, giving a Q&A after the movie, and it's always very, very interesting.
Yes, the guy doesn't stop. He's constantly working. Instagram. Go one night he's in Montevideo, and the other one is in Zurich, and in the afternoon in London.
Yeah, well, I tell you, I went to the second time he was there in London. So I've seen it 4 times. The last time I saw it, it was a meeting of some journalist sort of club, private showing. He was there to do the Q&A. I was hoping to chat with him. He disappeared immediately after the Q&A, and apparently he was going to another showing in London to do the Q&A there, so he had to rush off.
No,
so it's incredible. I mean, he's just going, yeah.
John, are you happy with this? I know you're totally happy about the product of your book, but with this new scenario about the history, and now you are part of this magnificent story. I know you are a very low-key person, but you have to know that now that this book is printed, you are part of the history, as same as Pablo Bierzi, as same as Pierce Reeve, Claybler Jr. You are in this VIP section of the Anderson story, VIP zone.
Well, you know, when I wrote the book, I felt I had to write the book. I felt it was like a calling, like a vocation. I felt it was extraordinary when I wrote it. I was like a man possessed. And Pablo Bierzi said the same thing about La Sociedad. And I'm sure Piers Paul Reed felt the same, because he did it in, you know, this incredibly short time. So I was like a man possessed, and it was like everything opened up for me. I mean, for example, you came just when I needed you. Yes. Other stories opened up just when I needed them. But I had to be incredibly organized. I had, you know, several things I was always balancing at one time, and I just worked 12-hour days, 7 days a week for 3 years. And it felt it was something from above. It was something outside of me that was compelling me to write this. And I wanted to
manage with the families, because it's lots of a lot of time you alone working on the computer, researching, and the girls doesn't like those times by yourself. I'm saying by my side, my Catalina, my wife, I think she just realized the magnitude of all of this when she saw the movie, and she told me, now I really understand your obsession with this magnificent thing.
But so I wanted to, you know, to write something for history, so that when people look back, they wouldn't just see, you know, the Disney movie. They wouldn't just see the survivors. They'd see the whole community, the context in which they came from, their day-to-day life, what the effect was when the survivors came back and they were living side by side with with those who stayed on the mountain. And I felt it was just a very important thing. So if you...
because I think now this is a trinity of info about the book. One is alive, that is the official chronological or book about the ordeal. There is La Sociedad de la Nieve, that is put the thing in the perspective of the survivors, and then it's to play the game that put all the ordeal in perspective and put the stories of the ones who didn't come back on the table. So now you're part of this. This is the finished part of the circle of the Andes, because there is no more stories to dig out.
Well, I mean, maybe in 100 years, I built up a big archive, and I hope at some point this archive can get passed on, and maybe in 100 years' time there are other stories. But this was meant to be, a sort of a. For now, it was meant to be the definitive book. Whether I don't like being in the limelight, as you know. I don't like. I wrote the book, and that was it. I put the book out. There's lots of work associated with that.
You have plans to make another book about any other subject? This start the fire in you to write more about stories?
Well, I've enjoyed writing. Whether I'll write another book, I don't know. I mean, it's a big investment of time, and I'm a bit of a perfectionist. So, it takes that maybe 10 times as long as someone else who can just dash something down. So we'll see, Guillermo. Stay tuned.
Well, John,
one thing that I don't know whether this will come to fruition, but it's sort of relevant. Alejandro Ferradas, a good friend of mine, is the nephew of the pilot, and his father, of course, was also involved in a very big, the biggest Uruguayan plane crash. And the anniversary of that comes up in 4 years, and it's never really been written about before.
Nice.
Yeah, it's never really been written about. So I mean,
Piers for Reed was right. Take care about Uruguay.
Maybe.
Yes.
But I'm not. That's not a promise. But that's just a little private conversation I had with Alejandro, because he's very. Obviously, his dad died in that accident, and you can't. I give the names of everyone who died in that accident in my book. You can't see them anywhere else in print.
Really? That unknown is the history.
You search for those, and you can't find the names of those who died. If you go to the place where the plane crashed, there's a metal plaque with the names, and you can take a photo. But that's it. It's not written about anywhere.
Yes, and the Air Force doesn't share that kind of info.
Yeah.
John, I really appreciate this nice chat and Q&A. I know that the people now have the opportunity to know you more, know about your history, about your background, and your love and commitment of the story. For me, it's been an incredible journey to work with you. I feel very lucky to be part of the book. I put my little effort on my little piece of work on this, but I really appreciate about you and your work, and I really want to think that I was one of the first who said this is it.
Well, I mean, so you shouldn't underestimate what you've given to this book. I mean, not just the Spanish, which was incredible, not just all the incredible interviews you did, which you transcribed for me. Incredible, which went in to make, a substantial section of the book, which I used, came from your research, but also your moral support. You believed in me, you believed in the book, and that encouraged me to, see it out to the end. And so it's been
you trust in me, and you give me the fuel to doesn't stop to work every week. It was, I think, a win-win situation. Now I'm, for example, yesterday I have a incredible chat with Fito, last days with Tintin. Now I have this access to this amazing story that amazed me from since I was a kid, and this is all because of you. So thank you.
Well, thank you as well. So.
Thank you, John, for your time, for your thoughts, and for your and for the book. I think the readers are gonna be very grateful to hear more from you. Thank you, John.
All right, thanks. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.